The alarm inside my helmet was screaming before my eyes even opened. Smoke filled the cabin. Metal groaned above me like it was still deciding whether to fall. I was on the floor of the dropship, pinned under a bent support beam, and the only thing keeping me calm was the fact that panic never once saved a life in my years of service. I pushed the beam off with a grunt that hurt more than the beam did. My name is Daniel Voss, and 30 seconds earlier I had been part of a 6-person recon team. Now, from what I could tell through the ringing in my ears, I was the only one left breathing. I called out 3 names. No answer came back. Just static, dripping fluid, and the tick of a dying engine somewhere behind me. I unclipped my harness and crawled toward the widening crack in the hull. Outside, the sky over this planet was a dull orange, thick with dust that never seemed to settle. We were not supposed to be here this long. The mission was simple. Land, scan, leave. Something had knocked us out of the sky before we ever got the chance. I grabbed my rifle, checked the charge, and stepped out into air that smelled like burnt wiring and something sweeter underneath it, almost like sap. My comms were dead, my team was gone, and I had no idea what had brought us down. I moved low, sticking to the shattered tree line that surrounded the crash site, my boots sinking slightly into soil that looked more like ash than dirt. Every few steps I stopped and listened. The planet was quiet in a way that made my skin crawl, the kind of quiet that comes right before something moves. That was when I heard it. A low clicking sound, rhythmic, almost musical, coming from somewhere ahead. I raised my rifle and crept closer, weaving between broken trees, until the ground dipped down into a wide hollow. What I saw made me stop breathing for a second. The hollow was lined with soft ridges of pale material, almost like dried clay, curving up into a dome shape. Inside, nestled along the walls, were dozens of small shapes, each one no bigger than my forearm, pale and curled and completely still, except for a slow, steady breathing motion. They were young, alien young. Something about the shape of their limbs, the way their small chests rose and fell, told me instantly that I was looking at creatures barely alive in the world, defenseless in every sense of the word. I should have backed away right then. Every part of my training told me to retreat, report, and let command decide what to do with a discovery like this. But my comms were dead, my team was gone, and something about standing there watching those small shapes breathe made retreating feel wrong in a way I could not explain. I heard the ground shift behind me. I turned fast, rifle raised, and found myself staring at something that had clearly not come to admire the scenery. It stood taller than me, its body covered in dark plating that caught what little light came through the dust clouds above. 6 limbs, 4 of them ending in curved claws, and a head that swung toward me with an unnatural, searching motion. It was not one of the small ones. This was a predator, drawn by the same scent that had drawn me, and it was not interested in me at all. Its attention was locked entirely on the hollow behind me. I did not think. I moved. I stepped sideways, placing myself directly between the predator and the young, and I fired a warning shot into the ground in front of it. The creature paused, head tilting, then let out a sound that vibrated through my chest more than my ears. It was not scared, it was annoyed. It came at me fast. I dodged the first swipe, felt the wind of it pass close enough to tug at my sleeve, and fired again, this time aiming for its shoulder joint. The shot connected, and the creature staggered, but did not fall. It came again, and this time I was not fast enough. Something struck my side hard enough to lift me off my feet. I hit the ground, rolled, and forced myself back up before the pain even had time to register properly. My ribs screamed. I ignored them. Behind me, the small shapes in the hollow had started making a soft, distressed sound, a kind of chirping that rose and fell like a warning song. I planted my feet again, right where I had been standing before, right between the danger and the young. The creature circled me, testing, and I understood then that it was not going to leave, not without what it came for. And I understood something else too, something that surprised me even as the thought formed. I was not going to move either. I fired until my rifle ran dry, then used it as a club when the creature closed the distance, swinging it into the side of its head with everything I had left. It caught my arm in return, claws raking across my forearm, and I felt heat and wetness spread beneath my sleeve. but I stayed standing. I stayed exactly where I was. Every strike it landed, I absorbed. Every attempt it made to get past me, I blocked with my own body, because there was nothing else left to block with. I do not know how long that fight lasted. Time stopped meaning anything, the moment I decided I was not going to step aside. At some point, the creature let out a sharp, pained cry and pulled back, favoring one of its limbs. It looked at me for a long moment, head tilted in that same searching way, then turned and disappeared into the dust and broken trees. I stood there swaying, blood running warm down my arm, ribs grinding with every breath, and behind me, the small shapes had gone quiet again, their chirping settling into something softer, almost content. I turned to check on them, and that was the last clear thing I remembered before my legs gave out and the orange sky tilted sideways and went dark. When I woke up, I was not in the hollow anymore. I was lying on something firm but not uncomfortable, in a wide chamber lit by a soft, glowing blue light that pulsed gently along the walls like a heartbeat. The air smelled like that same sweetness I had noticed near the crash site, stronger here, almost calming despite everything. My arm had been wrapped in something smooth and cool that had already stopped the bleeding. My ribs still ached, but the sharp edge of the pain had dulled into something manageable. I sat up slowly, every muscle protesting, and found that I was not alone. Rows of the small ones, the same young I had shielded, were arranged along the edges of the chamber, watching me with wide, curious eyes. When I moved, a few of them made that same soft chirping sound, but this time, it did not sound like distress. It sounded almost like greeting. Then the ground trembled, just slightly, and every one of the young went still and silent at once, turning their attention toward a wide opening at the far end of the chamber. Something entered that made my breath catch in my throat. She was enormous, easily 3 times my height, her body a deep shade of violet that shimmered faintly under the blue light. Unlike the armored predator that had attacked me, her form was smoother, almost elegant, with long limbs that moved with a strange, deliberate grace. Her eyes, when they found mine, held an intelligence that hit me immediately, sharp and focused, and utterly without fear. I did not need anyone to tell me what she was. Everything about the way the young reacted, the way the chamber itself seemed to shift and quiet around her, told me I was looking at the queen of this hive. I tried to stand, some old instinct telling me it was disrespectful to remain seated in front of something clearly in charge, but my legs buckled, and she moved forward fast enough to catch me before I hit the ground. Her touch was careful, far more careful than I expected from something her size, and she eased me back down without any visible effort. Up close, I could see fine patterns along her limbs, almost like markings, shifting slightly in color as she studied me. She leaned down, bringing her head level with mine, and made a sound low in her chest, a kind of rumble that I felt in my bones rather than heard with my ears. I had no idea what she was saying, but I understood somehow that it was not a threat. One of the young crawled closer to me, pressing itself gently against my uninjured side, and the queen's attention shifted to it, then back to me, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she were putting something together in her mind. She reached out one long limb and touched the bandage on my arm, tracing it lightly, then touched the bruising along my ribs with the same careful precision. I flinched, more from surprise than pain, and she paused immediately, watching my reaction with an intensity that made it clear she was learning, not testing. Days passed in that chamber, though I only knew that because of the shifting light patterns along the walls that seemed to mimic day and night. I was not restrained, I was not caged, I was simply there, healing, surrounded by creatures that should have terrified me, and somehow did not. The young grew bolder each day, climbing over my legs, resting against my side while I slept, chirping happily whenever I managed to sit up on my own. I found myself talking to them, quietly, the way you talk to anyone when the silence gets too heavy, telling them about my team, about home, about a life that felt increasingly far away. The queen visited often. She never spoke in any language I understood, but she watched everything closely, especially the way the young responded to me. Sometimes she would bring smaller creatures I did not recognize, offering me food that smelled strange but tasted better than I expected, watching carefully to see if I would eat. I always did. I was not in a position to refuse hospitality from something that could have crushed me without effort. One evening, if it could be called that in a place with no true sun, the queen entered the chamber differently than before. The young immediately went still, forming a loose half-circle around me, and I felt a shift in the air, something more formal, more deliberate than her usual visits. She approached slowly and knelt, if that was the right word for how her long limbs folded beneath her, bringing her eyes level with mine once again. This time, instead of simply watching, she reached out and placed one limb gently against my chest, right over my heart. The rumble that came from her chest this time was different, deeper, longer, and as she made the sound, I felt something strange happen. It was not painful, not exactly, but it was intense, like a pressure settling into my mind, carrying with it fragments of images rather than words. I saw the hollow where I had first found the young. I saw myself standing there, small and stubborn against something far stronger. I saw the predator retreating, and I saw, through eyes that were not mine, the moment the hive soldiers had found me collapsed and bleeding, still curled protectively around the entrance to that hollow, even as I lost consciousness. I understood, in a way that words could never have explained as clearly, exactly what she had seen in me. To her kind, protection of the young was the highest expression of worth a creature could show. It was not about strength or weapons or victory. It was about the choice to stand between danger and something helpless, regardless of the cost to yourself. I had made that choice without knowing anyone was watching, without any hope of reward, simply because I could not walk away. And now, in the eyes of the one being whose judgment shaped everything in this hive, that choice had marked me as something permanent. The rumble faded, and the pressure in my mind eased, leaving me staring at her with a slowly dawning realization that made my chest tighten. I was not a guest. I was not a prisoner either. I was something the hive did not have a word for in my language, something bonded, something claimed. In the same absolute and unquestionable way she considered every one of the young around us to be hers. I tried to explain that I had a life elsewhere, a home, people who might still be searching for me. I do not know if any of it reached her the way I intended, but her response was immediate and unmistakable in its certainty. She was not asking. She had already decided, in the same instinctive, unshakable way a parent decides to protect a child, that I belonged here now, bonded to the hive through the very act that had nearly killed me. Part of me wanted to be afraid of that. Part of me was afraid, if I am honest. But a larger part, the part that had spent days surrounded by small creatures who trusted me completely, who curled against my side like I was something safe rather than something dangerous, found it hard to summon the fear that logic told me I should feel. The young pressed closer around me, as the queen straightened to her full height, watching me with those sharp, intelligent eyes, and for the first time since the crash, I felt something settle in my chest that was not quite fear and not quite relief, but something entirely new. I thought about my old life, the missions, the orders, the version of myself that would have walked away from that hollow without a second thought, because the mission mattered more than anything else. That version of me felt distant now, almost like someone else entirely. I looked around the chamber, at the small creatures who had accepted me, without hesitation, at the queen, who had chosen me based on nothing but the way I had acted when no one expected anything from me at all, and I understood that whatever came next, I was not the same person who had crawled out of that wrecked dropship. I did not know what my life would look like from that point forward. I did not know if my people would ever find me, or if I would ever want them to. Not entirely, not after everything I had seen and felt inside this hive. But I knew one thing, with absolute certainty, as the queen settled beside me, her presence steady and unshakable, the young curling closer around us both. I had stood my ground when it mattered, without knowing anyone was watching, and that single choice had changed everything about who I was and where I belonged. The dust storms outside would eventually settle. The wreckage of my dropship would eventually be buried under shifting orange sand. Whatever world I had known before would keep spinning without me, somewhere far beyond that dull and endless sky. But here, surrounded by creatures who had no reason to trust a stranger, and had chosen to anyway, I finally understood that some choices are not made with the mind at all. They are made in the space between fear and instinct, in the moment you decide that something small and helpless matters more than your own safety. I had made that choice once, without thinking, without hesitation, and it had cost me everything I thought I knew about my place in the universe. It had also given me something I never expected to find so far from home, a purpose, a bond I had not asked for, but could no longer imagine living without. And a queen who looked at me, not as a stranger from another world, but as something she now considered entirely, unshakably her own.